Good morning, everybody. Uh, I've started a little bit earlier just to make some announcements concerning your oral exam. So, yesterday, as you know, we had the first session. So, 11 people received generally good marks. But, well, I had a mixed impression. Uh, most of you tell us about your scientific work and how it goes, and I think go in for unnecessary details. And to make it more philosophical, I think it would be uh, recommended to pay attention to these things which I enumerated. There were four. So first, it's if your say project deals with some technological discoveries or innovations, then you should estimate possible ecological threats or ecological hazards that comes from your project. Well, for example, if you launch satellites into space in order to make advertisement in space, like in type of a artificial constellation, and if you use, say, about 30 satellites, so you should sort of estimate possible ecological damage, because when you launch satellite into space, you should use rockets with toxic fuel, uh, some of which is not sort of burnt totally and contaminates the environment. Well, this is just an example. There can be many possible hazards, and so you should just say a few words about ecology. It will be more sort of philosophical, I would say, or more humane. And now the second idea is try to deliver your presentation as if you are speaking to a board of trustees, which take decision whether to give you financial assistance or not. So usually these people who deal with financial support of scientific projects have only vague idea about the details of your investigation. So you should speak more uh, generally, and understanding their sort of deficiencies, and just pay attention to, now we can say, possible benefits for humanity that will come out of your project in if it would be successfully realized. Okay. So this is the second one. The third one, uh, these are ethical questions. Well, most of course, they concern, say, biology, of course, genetic engineering, or but also robotics. If you give some to robot or to computer some important decisions, as for making a diagnosis, or just driving your car. So in case of a car accident or wrong diagnosis, who will bear the responsibility? Okay. So this is the idea. Okay. This is the third um, thing, that ethical questions, if there are any, of course. But I think in most of your researches, there is more or less some ethical dimension. And the fourth is philosophical implications. So how does your, say, project change the world? Well, returning to this example with artificial satellites used for advertisement in the sky, I cannot but remember the famous dictum of Immanuel Kant, that two things had always held me in admiration: starry heaven above me and moral law within me. Okay, so Starry Heaven is now being changed by advertisements. So perhaps we'll see a lot of advertisements in the sky, say the logotype of Procter and Gamble or some other like powerful enterprise. Okay, so just you can joke on that. Okay, or maybe uh, sort of uh, well, this is a possible philosophical or cultural implication of your project. So just invent something, just colorful detail, okay, which sort of helps other people to understand what's going on, okay? Well, now I will leave you for a second and return. So things uh, in my household. So I repeat just four important things that should be sort of that I wish you include into your oral exam, your report, if you just describe us your work. But in case you just choose a philosophical topic, like Ekaterina Izotova did yesterday, so it also will be very good and very well appreciated. Okay, so I repeat again. So I'll maybe write in chat. So first, um, ecological threats or hazards. I can. Second, um, speaking as if before a board of trustees. I This is Lev, the husband of Marina. Uh, then my sincere, uh, mm, uh, well, uh, thanks for organizing this conference. And uh, this is the last lecture now. What um, what will follow will be the oral exams. So, like before, the board of trustees. A board. A board of trustees. So, people who are not so very competent, um, don't know the details, so perhaps not there. It will be not easy for them to catch your sophisticated mathematics. Then the third is ethical questions, if they exist. Uh, we'll speak about today about Karl Popper and his moral problems. So ethical questions or moral problems, if they exist or not, and philosophical implication. I mean, also cultural, philosophical, um, fickle, and cultural implications. Well, this is all. So these four things, I wish you just maybe one or two words. If you say there are no ecological threats, or even if your project improve the ecology or the environment, um, also it is well, you are welcome to say that. If you speaking sort of in a more understandable way, okay, so you remember this dictum of Rutherford, that if you can't explain your theory to a bartender, it's probably no good. Okay, so I can just say, if you can't explain what you are doing to your mother-in-law um, or father-in-law, okay, then it's probably no good. Okay, ethical questions, if any, and philosophical and cultural implications. Well, that's all. And I wish you to prepare for your exams, to just to make it interesting not only for you but for your peers, for your comrades. Okay. Well, now it's 9 o'clock. Let's get started. This is the last lecture. It is devoted to philosophy of science properly, and so to those people who developed this interesting field, philosophy of science, history of science, which are reflections just on that big way which mankind has already passed. So we'll start with a certain date. It's very important, 1889, the date when Russian poetess Anna Akhmatova was born, and on the same year, in the same year, was born a very interesting philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein, from whom starts, I think, modern philosophy of science. Ludwig Wittgenstein in Vienna. Uh, he was born in Vienna in a rich Jewish family, but the Jews were emancipated. His mother was Roman Catholic and his father was a Protestant. So he received baptism in the Catholic Church. I've read, as far as I remember, it was the Church of Saint Stephen in Vienna. But he didn't receive a profound religious education. Perhaps this conversion of his parents or their embracing of Christianity was due to just global process of Jewish emancipation, which went throughout Europe. If you remember, the father of Karl Marx also received baptism in the Lutheran Church, and so and Marx himself also was baptized in the Lutheran Church by the at the age of 6. So this was just a general cultural movement. Okay, so it didn't imply that those Jews who received baptism were sort of really converted like Saint Paul the Apostle. Okay, so they just remained where they were and did what they um, did before. Just if it was business, it was business. If it was culture, it was culture. Well, for example, a famous composer, Mahler, also received baptism because otherwise he couldn't just sort of be the director of Vienna Conservatory. So you see, so that's all what I want to say about the background of Ludwig Wittgenstein. Now about his education. He received education in Lyceum in Linz, and then went to high technical school in Berlin. And from that school, he moved to Manchester, also to a technical school. And while in Manchester studying engineering, aircraft engineering, he suddenly felt a vocation. Well, like René Descartes, as you remember, had his three fateful dreams. So the same perhaps happened with Wittgenstein. So he was preparing to be an engineer. So why should he choose? Oh, so why? Yes, why should he choose another vacation, the vacation of a philosopher? How it happened? What were those dreams that Wittgenstein saw? Or maybe there were no dreams. We don't know exactly because Wittgenstein did not leave reminiscences. So uh, you know that there are people who left reminiscences, like St. Augustine, the Confessions, or the Confessions of Jean-Jacques Rousseau, the Confessions of Leo Tolstoy. So we can follow their evolution from their sort of written testimony. Or well, but here we don't have anything like that, so we can only guess what promoted or what triggered this conversion to philosophy. Okay, but it was real. So in summer 1911, Wittgenstein visited a famous mathematician, German mathematician and philosopher, Gottlob Frege. Yes, you see, there's also, like with Descartes, it started with a philosophy of mathematics. So it seems that, like Descartes, Wittgenstein was seeking for some strict laws or ultimate truth or confirmation of, or say, a way to find the exact truth. And he saw that this model is here, he saw this model of this, say, method in mathematics. So that's why he first went to Gottlob Frege, who wrote already in German his book Philosophy of Arithmetic. Well, Gottlob Frege received Wittgenstein coolly, not in this present meaning of the word cool, but just frigidly, okay? Well, reservedly, cool. The first meaning is, well, not very hot, okay? So it was not a hot welcome, okay? A warm welcome. It was a cool welcome. But he was polite, and he suggested Wittgenstein to visit Russell, Bertrand Russell, because Bertrand Russell at that time also wrote the first volume together with Whitehead, the philosophy, the principles of mathematics, and this is the book on the philosophical foundations of mathematics. Bertrand, we spoke about Bertrand Russell, I think and he will be important today also. Um, so at that time, Bertrand Russell was teaching in Cambridge. So Manchester and Cambridge are not far away from each other. They are on the same railroad which connects London with Liverpool. So if you travel from London to Liverpool, you will pass Cambridge, Birmingham, and Manchester. And so this is not very far. Now it takes, I think, about 4 hours by train to travel from Manchester to Cambridge. But maybe at that time it was a little bit slower. Well, nevertheless, Wittgenstein undertook this journey, and in October 1911, he arrived to Cambridge with the firm decision to stay there if Bertrand Russell would have nothing against. So Bertrand Russell was a little bit shocked, first of all, by poor English abilities of Wittgenstein. He spoke broken English at that time, but insisted on speaking English rather than German. Well, Bertrand Russell knew German very well because he was already the author of a very scholarly book about Gottfried Leibniz, which appeared in the year 1900. So it was easy for him to speak German, but Wittgenstein was a very like obstinate man, and he continued to speak English. Well, he later managed to speak English very well, and he delivered lectures in Cambridge from 1929 to 1947 for about 20 years. So maybe with some accent, I don't know, but still he was he mastered English. Okay. Well, and Bertrand Russell, seeing the obstinacy of this new pupil, he also understood that there was a spark of talent there, or maybe of genius. So he allowed Wittgenstein to stay in Cambridge and listen to his lectures. So this lasted 3 years. Then happened the First World War. Wittgenstein was Austrian citizen, so if he stayed in England, he would probably be incarcerated or interned in a labor camp or something like that. So, the war happened in summer. So at that time, Wittgenstein was in his homeland. So when the war started, he just conscripted into the army, and served as junior officer the whole war. First on the Russian front, where he found in some hut the book in German of Leo Tolstoy, Introduction to the Gospels. Why it is interesting? Because if you read this book of Leo Tolstoy, his simple explanation of the Gospels, you will see that they are enumerated, that they are in their thesis form, which are enumerated 1, 2, 3, and so on. So the same idea Wittgenstein used for his future great work, which received the name of Tractatus Logica Philosophicus. Well, while in Latin, I will just explain. Just wait a little bit. Tractatus Logico. Perhaps it will be the last Latin phrase that you will hear from me, because of course Latin is rapidly disappearing. Last time on Tuesday it was only one phrase, this natura non facit saltus. This was a quotation from Max Planck's lecture, which was of course not in Latin but in German. Tractatus Logica Philosophicus. So this Tractatus or Logica Philosophical treatise was written by Wittgenstein after the war, when he was taken prisoner by the Italian army on the Austrian-Italian front. And so he was held in this camp for prisoners. And there he was allowed to use his pen and notebooks, and that he wrote this treatise, Logica Philosophica. And because he read during the war this work of Leo Tolstoy, so the structure of this Logica Philosophical treatise resembles somehow the structure of Tolstoy's introduction into the Gospels. Okay, by enumeration of facts, its concise form, and there are some similarities. Okay, so now what was the contents of this Logica Philosophical treatise? So, and why was it called in Latin? So this was not the idea of Wittgenstein. It was the idea of his colleague from Cambridge, Moore, who just gave the idea of calling it so in remembrance of Spinoza's work. Spinoza's work was called Tractatus Theologa Politicus. So this is like an allusion on the work of, on the title of one of famous Spinoza's works. Okay, now what is the contents? Because this is already, we are starting philosophy of science as such. Well, it is was called the Bible of so-called neo-positivism. We already mentioned two kinds of positivism. The first positivism, the positivism of Auguste Comte, which was optimistic, and Auguste Comte's idea was that science will eventually explain everything, even the behavior of man and society in general. Well, the second positivism, which was created by Ernst Mach, Henri Poincaré, and Pierre Duhem, was more modest. It centered on the idea that economy of thinking and explanatory role of science. So science only explains phenomena in the well, most concise and even we can say simple way. So without using some hidden variables or some hidden qualities like atoms, ether, well, or say uh, trajectory. Well, you see, with trajectory in quantum mechanics, the second positivism was right. So we had to leave this idea of trajectory, objectively existing trajectory of the particle. With ether, also they were right, the second positivist. So Einstein was right in discarding this idea of a privileged system of reference connected with world ether. But with atoms, it was a big blunder, okay? Well, Ernst Mach was not so humble as Einstein, and he didn't say that his polemics with Boltzmann was the biggest blunder of his life. Well, so scientists should say that instead of him. But it was the blunder. It was the biggest, we can say, it was the biggest blunder of second positivism, this discarding of kinetic model of Ludwig Boltzmann and discarding the existence of atoms or other elementary particles. Okay, well, not other, but elementary particles out of which atom proved to be built. So, well, so we have to take positivism also critically. Just don't, we shouldn't just blindly believe in all that positivists say, be they so smart as Ernst Mach. Well, now this is another kind of positivism. So what is that? Also modest, because Wittgenstein says that all that we can do is to make some sentences, logical sentences about observable facts. And because we cannot say move out of this universe and take a glance on all the universe from the point of view of the eternity, so we cannot speak about universe as a whole. Okay, so like as if we are observing it from above, which we cannot find this above out of, or this point out of which we can observe the whole universe together with us, the observers. So because there's no way to find this system, point of observance outside our universe, we cannot formulate the propositions either about universe itself as a whole or about its possible creator, because we cannot we are, if we are speaking, for example, about God, we sort of making him part of this universe, which is absurd. So if we say that God created the universe, then we cannot speak about God as the fact of this universe. So our sort of speech becomes senseless. And also senseless, according to Wittgenstein, are, say, estimations or, say, well, uh, propositions concerning ethical questions, moral questions, or aesthetical questions. So there should be like, what is the meaning of life, or what is the meaning of history? These questions should be left alone. About the treatise ends with a celebrate phrase, of which we cannot speak, we should better be, logically speak, uh, meaningfully speak, we should better be silent. Okay, so well, this treatise was published with the preface of Bertrand Russell in German periodical, which was edited by Wilhelm Ostwald. Wilhelm, well, perhaps those who study chemistry know Wilhelm Ostwald. know this man because he made contribution in chemistry. And also he was interested in philosophy and was himself a representative of the so-called second positivism of the Ernst Mach school. Well, he was also mentioned by Lenin critically. Remember our previous lecture on Tuesday where we spoke about Lenin's work, Materialism and Empiricism. There we can find harsh accusations against Wilhelm Ostwald also, not only about Mach. Well, so now, as I think it's enough, just this will be a connection between second positivism and third positivism. So Wilhelm Ostwald is the figure of the second positivism, but he published the treatise of Ludwig Wittgenstein in 1921 in German, and so that's how he ushered the new epoch, the epoch of third positivism or logical positivism. Okay. Well, shortly after that, this treatise was translated into English. But what happened with the author? Ludwig Wittgenstein decided to quit philosophy, also sudden decision. If we compare him with Descartes, continue this comparison to the end, we can say that like René Descartes wanted to hide from the public and even coined the dictum, good lived that man who managed to hide well. Okay, so he decided to hide from the public and even from he moved even out of Vienna, the capital, and moved to the obscure village where he decided that he would teach just be a teacher in an elementary school. Well, a teacher in elementary school teaches all the subjects, but so he received this post. He even studied in a certain pedagogical college to receive some essentials of pedagogics, and he received the post of a teacher in a village school and started to teach children. This was the beginning of 1920s. Well, you see, you can understand, perhaps you also can teach physics or mathematics, but just imagine that you leave Skoltech and go to a village school to teach mathematics, okay? So this just like we can say uh, downshifting, yes, like they say that. Well, so this is again like a turn in Wittgenstein's biography. So I think sooner or later this biography will appear in Russian series Life of Important of Exceptional People. Uh, yes, this called in Russian "Жизнь замечательных людей" or well, Life of Illustrious People. We can translate it that. So this is a series founded by Russian writer Maxim Gorky. Because there's something to write in that. It didn't yet appear, but I think it will appear eventually because the life of Wittgenstein is full of interesting events. It's very sort of how to say impressive. Well, so he went to this village, but there started another thing. He got into conflict with the parents of those children, and some of with some children also they didn't want to receive his ideas, and well, children were divided in the village. More talented children with a gift to mathematics, they just loved their teacher, and followed him. But but there were also children who were not so gifted, and they felt as if abandoned and uh, maybe developed inferiority complex. So there were problems with discipline. And Wittgenstein, being an emotional man, he started beating the children. Okay, you know that beating is now prohibited in Russian schools, maybe in Austrian schools also, especially if this beating leads to some maiming of children, okay, or say syncopes or bleeding from the ears. There were such incidents. So their enraged parents uh, decided to suit in the court Wittgenstein, and he was pronounced guilty and even had to undergo compulsory medical treatment in a psychiatric hospital. Just he was declared sort of insane. Okay, that's why he escaped the prison term for molesting the children. Well, Wittgenstein was very sorry for that, and even in 30s, when he was already in Cambridge, he decided to visit again this village and ask forgiveness from these children and from their parents. Well, he was not beaten by the parents. They received him, and maybe somebody forgave him, but somebody just say, well, stop it and go away where you came. So people didn't understand his behavior and didn't understand what he wants. Well, so this was a failure. He spent 1 or 2 years in the capital with his sisters, helping them to build the house. And this house is still can be observed in Vienna. So if you come to Vienna, you can see the house built by Wittgenstein. This is like one of the attractions. Okay, in Vienna. But eventually, what is inevitable happened. So in 1929, he moved to Cambridge again, where he started philosophy. So because he was the author of a celebrated work, which created a sensation among philosophers and was regarded as a Bible of neo-positivism, so he was given not a chair, but he was allowed to lead a seminar or say course in philosophy, which was just up to him to choose like the contents. So nobody insisted on his teaching, say, history of philosophy or logic or methodology. Just he was teaching his author course. Okay, we say in Russian авторский курс, or we can translate it as author course. So this course of your own, which you invent from beginning to end. Okay. Well, I can't afford to this course. I have to follow a certain program. That's follow the example of other courses of history and philosophy of science. That's why I speak about Wittgenstein, because in all imaginable courses of history and philosophy of science, this name shouldn't be omitted. Okay. Well, and I like him, of course. Also, that's I think he's a very interesting personality. So from 1929 to 1947 starts a new period, maybe more or less common, successful period of Wittgenstein's life. But what was that philosophy that Wittgenstein taught to to Cambridge students? This was not the philosophy of logic, philosophical treatise. So he didn't just repeat what he had already done. He sort of was outgrowing out of his former ideas, developing something new. Here we have also an example. This is a critical and pre-critical Kant. You remember that in 17 1870, Kant got acquainted with the works of David Hume, this famous Scottish and English philosopher and skeptic. And this was a challenge for Kant, how it is possible to create exact science if we have such like criticism of our knowledge given by David Hume. So from this date starts a critical period in the life of Kant. Well, the same we can say that there are two periods in Wittgenstein's creative life. So first period was this period of when he prepared this logical philosophical treatise and wanted to implement it in pedagogics. So creating like a program how to teach children in the in the way of neopositivism. So um, do not teach them about senseless questions like morals and aesthetics, about which it's better to be silent, but teach them logic, mathematics, geography, biology. Well, this more or less what is happening in Skoltech, okay? So people are centered on positive facts and logical, uh, the logical way of narration of their discoveries, okay? Also heavily um, so with sometimes with heavy and sophisticated mathematics. So this is the ideal of the like first period of Wittgenstein's ideas. But now starts another period. Wittgenstein now poses the question how language, ordinary language, is possible. How can we, because he understood perhaps from his experience in the village school that people cannot be sort of remodeled according to neo-positivistic standards, okay? So people continue to speak about love, about beauty, about religion, about meaning of life. So you cannot just sort of eradicate, yes? Uh, can we say so? Eradicate, just turn out of them these concepts. So now Wittgenstein says, well, if it is also kind of a fact, so it also pertains to this world. So we should explain this fact also, the sort of persistence of those senseless, we can say in double commas, words like good and bad, free and necessary. So how can we now explain all this and how can we explain the language? So this is the idea of later Wittgenstein, the philosophy of language. Um, well, the question which you put, Alexei, is the question which many philosophers try to solve. It's enigmatic, you know, a little bit, because Wittgenstein remained enigmatic throughout his life. He didn't even publish another book. So this book of Wittgenstein, which of later Wittgenstein, Philosophical Investigations, Philosophical Investigations, um, was published after his death, I think in 1954. Wittgenstein died in 1951 from prostate cancer. Well, I will speak about his death a little bit later. So now, if you read this book, it's now published also in Russian, Philosophical Investigations. So you can see that it is devoted to different questions and resembles a little bit the thoughts of Blaise Pascal. So it is not in order. It's, you know, it's not just book with one sort of plan or logic. So there are different thoughts on different subjects, And but maybe there's one idea of this work. It's this philosophy of language. So he starts from St. Augustine. You remember St. Augustine's Confessions? We mentioned it just briefly when we spoke about the fact that Ludwig Wittgenstein didn't leave Confessions. Okay, so Confessions of Augustine is just also a description of his first experiences as a child. So Augustine remembers how he was taught language, how his parents or his teachers explained to him the meaning of these words and how to uh, sort of uh, well combine or associate a certain thing with a certain word. Okay, so Wittgenstein decided to continue thinking in line with Augustine. So it's also a reminder for those who think that uh, medieval or late ancient philosophy is outdated, that perhaps it is oversimplification, because it is now intimately connected with the developments of the philosophy of language of the 20th century. So you never know what text belonging to what ancient philosophy can become very important our days. That's perhaps the explanation why I spent so much time speaking about the philosophers of the previous epochs. Okay, so this appearance of the name of Augustine in philosophical investigations is not chance. It is just a sign and meaningful. Okay, so now we starting from Augustine, Wittgenstein continues to analyze the language now not in way of criticizing it like it was done by Francis Bacon in his Idols of the Marketplace. So not that now the later Wittgenstein doesn't say that we should sort of clean our language and sort of make it more sensible and sort of um, banish from it all the senseless words. Okay, like this was the ideal of Bacon. So for Bacon, senseless words were scholastic language, substance, accidents, matter, form, purpose, or final causes. That he wanted just to like clean our language, expurgate it from these senseless words. But you know, it's also probably not so um, well, not so easy and not so profitable, because, for example, we now use two words for out of the arsenal of scholastics, like real and virtual, realis and virtualis. These were letters, these were terms coined by scholastics. And now we say virtual reality even. We are imitating the schoolmen, okay, in our language. So uh, for Wittgenstein, it was not the question of censoring or sort of selecting the good words and banishing the bad words, but the more modest and I think more profound approach of understanding why these terms came into being and what is their sort of what are they laden with what meaning. Okay, so it's a question of understanding our language, not just looking at it with a editor's eye, you know, as when your articles are edited, they say, well, this is nonsense, just cross it out of your article immediately, you see. So now just understand, even mistakes, you remember Freud said that even our mistakes should be somehow understood. So evident nonsense, you see, also has some hidden meaning. Okay, so according to Wittgenstein, this we should analyze humbly our language and the emergence of different concepts, and maybe their sort of their possible um, maybe significance for creating something new. Well, this work remained unfinished. You see, he didn't publish it, so it was published from his notebooks, which he left. Well, but he created a certain movement, Wittgenstein, and a lot of people were connected with him. So among those people whom he met and with whom he even quarreled, well, I can enumerate, well, certain, well, um, mm, important names. For example, Bertrand Russell again. He was his teacher, Russell. Then Karl Popper. This is also a very important personality of whom we'll speak just after a short break, um, because he is also somehow connected with Wittgenstein. Well, you perhaps know about Wittgenstein's poker, how he menaced, well, maybe jokingly menaced Popper by a poker taken from a, well, Camino. I think Camin, it's like a little furnace in your room, okay? Or like heath, where you can keep a fire, okay? So Karl Popper, then um, Elizabeth Anscombe, was his student, and I'm proud to mention another name of woman, Anscombe. Well, and Paul Feyerabend. These were people who were in this or that way associated with uh, with Wittgenstein. So there are four of them. Okay. Now, so we can make a short break, and then I will tell you a little bit more about Karl Popper, and then we'll compare these two philosophies, philosophy of Karl Popper, which is called sometimes post-positivistic philosophy, and we'll compare it with Wittgenstein's philosophy and what and how then philosophy of science sort of developed in two ways: Popperian school and Wittgenstein school, and how emerged a third school, which issued in the appearance of a work of Thomas Kuhn, uh, The Structure of Scientific Revolution. So there are different, like, um, branches of philosophy of science, and it's interesting to just look at them in their development. Okay, so 5 minutes, please. Okay, 5 minutes have expired, and so we'll start again uh, uh, our lecture. So uh, about well, there's a question, funny story about uh, poker. Was it true? Yes, it is true. Well, as a fact, which was remembered by Bertrand Russell, who was just the witness of all this how to say, accident. Now we'll speak about Karl Popper, because this incident is connected with his lecture in Cambridge in October 1946. So we'll start with Karl Popper, and we'll eventually come to this Wittgenstein's poker. Okay, so we'll treat it as an event in fateful event in Popper's life. Well, Karl Popper is perhaps less um, uh, um, advantageous or figure for say life of illustrious people. Karl Popper. He was born in. His life was more calm and less eventful than the life of Wittgenstein. He was born in 1902 also in Vienna, also in a Jewish family, and also emancipated Jewish family. His father was a Protestant, but there was no Catholic influence. Well, so we'll speak about the last years of Wittgenstein also in connection with Popper and in connection with the uh, um, uh, say philosophy of his pupils, Elizabeth Anscombe and Paul Feyerabend. So now so I don't say goodbye to Wittgenstein. I will return to his last days, okay? So now we'll just a little bit switch to Popper. So Popper was born in Vienna. There was no Catholic influence, but there was only mild Protestant influence, like with the life of Karl Marx. So his father even selected for Popper a school with no religious teaching. Well, it was not easy task for Vienna of the pre-war period, where the Catholic Church was like dominant, and the emperor himself, Franz Joseph, was patronizing the Catholic Church. So of course, in the majority of the schools, religious instruction was obligatory, but there existed some like exceptions. And so for Karl Popper was chosen the school with no compulsory religious sort of instruction. And well, what was the significance of this choice? That Popper found himself in a company with the same, like the children of um, the families, from the families of the same sort of worldview. So open, agnostic, and well, maybe secretly anti-clerical, I don't know. But it sort of, the formation is not only given in school, as you very well know, but also by the by your peers or by the comrades you meet in school or in the university or now in Skoltech. So don't underestimate this a source of influence. Well, unfortunately, when Popper was maturing, an adolescent, the war started, which brought, of course, hardships. And well, personally, Popper was not, of course, enlisted, because when the war started, he was only 12 years old. So he wasn't didn't serve in the army. But of course, here, being a boy with acute imagination, so he could, of course, understand that something terrible is going on. So he, during the war and after the war, he was influenced by two ideologies at the same time: Marxist ideology, and for a certain period he even became himself a young socialist, and Freudian ideology. Well, with not exactly Freud himself, uh, but of course this dominating personality, I mean Sigmund Freud, who at that time lived in Vienna on Berggasse, in a, well, I think it's like not the whole house belonged to Freud, but only 2 or 3 stores of in a building. So there were several flats which were united, and now there's a Freud museum of Freud in Vienna, Berggasse. Well, if you visit Vienna, just you can. Uh, I don't remember exactly the number, maybe 9, or just with a question mark. Okay, Berggasse is just what I remember very well. I've been there, so this is a mental picture before my eyes. Okay, so Freud was domineering, but Popper did not study with Freud, but with one of his pupils, Alfred Adler. At that time, Alfred Adler was like banished by Freud and proclaimed a heretic, okay, kind of a heretic, because Alfred Adler did not embrace all the Freudian concepts. For example, he didn't embrace Oedipus complex, which Freud declared the cornerstone of psychoanalysis. So Alfred Adler introduced another theory, new to Freud, but maybe Freudian in its source. It's so-called inferiority complex. So, well, especially it was used while treating the adolescents. You remember this Spinoza's dictum that understanding brings recovery. Okay, if you have some problem, then if you understand the source of this or the cause of this problem, then you can recover by understanding it. So many adolescents, according to Adler, were suffering from inferiority complex, but couldn't understand it. So the task of recovery is to explain to an adolescent that he suffers from inferiority complex. When an adolescent will understand it, then he will recover. Well, this sounds plausible and intriguing, and perhaps for 19 years old Popper, it was just like a possible array of hope, and he eagerly began this work with Alfred Adler. And well, later he also matriculated into the Vienna University and later finished it with a degree in sociology. So psychology and sociology were the first lessons of science that that Popper received. But there also came the first disillusionment, because when he helped Alfred Adler to work with adolescents with problems, he he found one example of adolescent and wanted to speak with Alfred Adler about this boy and how his difficulties, but Alfred Adler dismissed him, saying, well, that's just another case of inferiority complex, so nothing interesting here. Well, Popper was at that time very much shocked by this negligence of his scientific advisor, or you understand. And he said, well, if you dismiss so easily a case without even try to see it or to sort of investigate it, then perhaps other cases which you mentioned, that because Adler said, I've seen thousands of such cases, then perhaps this thousand is also questionable. So maybe after I gave you this example, you will say that you have seen 1001 examples of, say, inferiority complex. Well, and well, I think this event was not without consequences, because later, just analyzing this situation and comparing it with the results of a full lunar eclipse of 1919, which seemed to confirm Einstein's general theory of relativity, he came to the conclusion that psychoanalysis is not a science, is pseudoscience, because it cannot be sort of put to test, or as later Popper said, it couldn't be falsified. What is to falsify? This just to put a certain theory to an experimental test and see whether it is true or false. But with inferiority complex, you couldn't invent such a theory. For example, well, I usually give this example that, well, I'm teaching, giving lectures in philosophy. You can easily explain it by inferiority complex, that I have an inferiority complex, or I'm a narcissist, and I'm just want to sort of reestablish my reputation in my own eyes, okay, by giving lectures. But if I just stop giving lectures, or you can also say that I did it out of inferiority complex, because I felt that I was not like a good lecturer, and that's my inferiority complex made me sort of stop my lecturing. So you see, uh, any strategy in my behavior could be explained by this inferiority complex. So whatever I do, the psychologist will find an answer and a cause, especially if it comes to analyzing my dreams or your dreams. Okay, so here is a great space for imagination, and no space for sort of testing whether this explanation of your dream, interpretation of your dream, is correct or not. Okay, so no crucial test, and so we can say that Adler's theory or Freudian theory is not falsifiable, cannot be falsified, and if there's no such test exists, then the theory cannot be regarded scientific. So this is a new idea, the idea of falsification. It was developed by Popper already in his book, which was published in German in 1934. Well, then followed this disastrous event, uh, history and astronomy. Well, with astronomy, you can predict solar eclipses or lunar eclipses. So here we can test, say, Ptolemy or astronomy. Well, you see, for example, uh, there was I can give you an example how Copernican system seemed to be falsified. Um, Please don't check your microphone. Somebody has not shut down his microphone. Um, I'm sorry. Just see to it that your microphones are um, mm, switched off. Okay, so let's continue with Copernicus. You remember this case with Venus. So according to Copernican system, Venus can be very close to Earth, and can be on the other side of the orbit of the Earth, so on the other side of the Sun. So the distance will be 6 times larger. So Venus should seem 6 times smaller than than when it is closer to the in the affinity of the Earth. So it should be a visible effect, but it cannot be sort of watched, observed. So this is a falsification of Copernican system. Later, Galileo explained why it didn't happen, why Venus is more or less of the same, say, magnitude, or of the same brightness. That's because of the phases of Venus. Okay, so the same with Mendeleev's table. There were Mendeleev put elements according to their atomic weights, but later it was found out that, for example, um, uh, potassium and argon are in should be just if you follow the logic of Mendeleev, they should be put in the such an order that potassium will enter the ideal gases, and argon would be in uh, well, these how to say elements together with sodium and lithium. But you see that it was so clear that you should sort of um, well, put potassium where it is, and argon leave with the inert gases, so that well, uh, some later this was explained because it was shown by Moseley then that the um, place of the element in Mendeleev table does not depend on its atomic weight, but depends on the charge of the nucleus. So you see that these theories could be falsified and even were falsified. Also, Mendel's experiments were also tested on other plants, and the results didn't follow. This Mendel's law didn't work in other experiments. That's why Mendel was discarded at first. So you see, exact in exact sciences, also in astronomy, there can be some theories and the possible like criticism of these theories. But in history also we have historical facts. For example, we say Borodino battle, then you can make archaeological excavations, okay, on the site of the battle and find, say, arrows, or with Borodino it will be guns, or you understand. So pieces of ammunition, or some even buttons of soldiers. Okay, so you can uh, also verify or falsify historical facts. Uh, well, as far as I can see, but psychological theories are very difficult, especially Freudian or Freudian type, are very difficult to falsify. For example, Oedipus complex. If you don't feel sexual attraction to your mother, then it can be explained by internal censorship, that you sort of censor your feelings, do not allow them to come to your consciousness. But if you feel them, nevertheless, it's also a confirmation of Oedipus complex. So if you don't feel, it is explained, and if you feel, it is the more explained. Okay, so here you cannot find like a strict test which can disprove this hypothesis of the Oedipus complex. Okay, well, this is how it goes, and so Popper was quite clear here, and the same approaches were given by him to other theories like Marxist theory, because he could see that Marxists um, try to explain everything, and even the August Revolution in 1991 can also be explained by Marxists as a instigated by American Secret Service. Okay, well, you see, so explanation will always be found. Whatever happens in sociology, Marxists already have their explanations. Okay, so otherwise Marxism would die out like a theory. Okay, it well, and also uh, the same with the evolution theory. Also, you can explain everything. Well, say that's evolution. That's how evolution goes. We have a perfect brain. Well, because brain is needed, then somehow it developed. by during the process of evolution. Okay. Well, this is, you see, I'm not just an advocate, you understand, I'm not an advocate of Karl Popper. We'll later speak about his, I would say, ideological enemy, former student, and then sort of enemy, not of course a physical enemy, but ideological enemy, Paul Feyerabend. And then we'll see who stresses, of course, the weak points of Popper's theory. So we'll just postpone this discussion to analyzing the life and work of Paul Feyerabend. Okay, so now we should continue with the life of Karl Popper, because otherwise we'll never finish. So Karl Popper, in 1934, he already wrote this book, Logik der Forschung, or The Logic of Investigation in German, where he formulated for the first time his falsification principle. This book was published in Vienna in German in 1934. But 4 years after, Austria was annexed by Germany, and there followed this disaster especially for Jewish population. Well, Freud barely escaped from Austria. His daughter Anne Freud, again a woman, a very important one in psychoanalysis, was even arrested by Gestapo and kept for a whole day in custody. But then Freud managed somehow to use his connections and release her. So by means of also powerful connections, he was allowed to move from Vienna to Paris and eventually to London, where he died in September 1939, as I told you in a previous lecture. So, well, Popper also felt that ground is burning under his feet, and decided to emigrate from Austria. Well, this decision was made before the Anschluss, or before the unification of Germany and Austria, because he felt something in the air, perhaps. And so he moved to New Zealand in 1937. And he taught there in New Zealand in the same university where Ernst Rutherford received his education, Christchurch. This is the University of Christchurch, New Zealand. Well, and so only after the war, Popper managed to return to Europe. At that time, he was invited to England, to London School of Economics. And during this period of war, so starting from 1937 to 1945, he wrote his famous book, The Open Society and Its Enemies. Society and its enemies, which made a name for him because it was written in English, because he taught in New Zealand, of course, in English. Nobody in New Zealand could understand German. Well, Latin was out of question. So he started to teach in English, so he mastered English, and he wrote this book, The Open Society and Its Enemies, in English. So it appeared in 1945, and immediately there was a success. And that's why he was invited to England. And among his students in London School of Economics was a famous multimillionaire, George Soros. He was at that time only 17 years old. So but it explains why George Soros later called his foundation the Open Society. Perhaps you know this foundation because it gave financial assistance to a lot of cultural projects in former Soviet Union during Yeltsin's period in the 90s. Well, so here is this connection. And at that time also happened this fateful episode, which can be described as Wittgenstein's poker. Poker, which in Russian means kочерга. Okay, so how did it all happen? So Karl Popper, already in England, he was invited to the Cambridge Ethical Society to deliver a lecture on moral problems of science. He was invited, I think, by Bertrand Russell, and Bertrand Russell also remembers how they drank tea with lemon before the lecture in one of the cafes of Cambridge. So Bertrand Russell is an eyewitness, so from him we know all the details. The president of that session of Ethical Club was Wittgenstein. So Wittgenstein formally introduced Karl Popper and say, well, Karl, please give the title of your presentation. Well, and when Wittgenstein heard that the presentation will be on moral problems, he sort of displayed a little skepticism whether there can be problems in science or only puzzles. This is an interesting question, how to sort of distinguish between problem and puzzle. Well, according to Wittgenstein, science should be more humble and devote itself to solving of puzzles. And scientists should not pretend to solve problems, especially moral problems. So there's something about remained in Wittgenstein of his older period when he said that about some things you better keep silence, or just if you speak about them, speak modestly as if you are playing a language game. You understand? Language game, like we are playing today with our language game. Well, what is language game? When say I deliver a lecture on Kant and then deliver next week a lecture on Hegel, students in Moscow Physico-Technical Institute, where I work, ask me, so Ivan Vladimirovich, what is your preference? Whom you better like, Kant or Hegel? Because they are so incompatible with each other. So you should sort of prefer who is better according to your taste. And then I can say, well, this is kind of a language game or a theatrical performance. So this week I play Hamlet, and next week I'll play, say, I can't imagine whom it. Well, we can play Chatsky, for example, from Griboyedov's play. Okay, so. Well, of course, there's some affinity between Hamlet and Chatsky, but I can also play Julius Caesar, for example, if we stage Shakespeare. So you know that I have to change somehow. So I can play Raskolnikov in Crime and Punishment if such play will be staged, okay? Or Alyosha Karamazov. I know this play was staged by a theater on Malaya Bronne. So, what is the difference between Alyosha Karamazov and, say, Prince Hamlet? So I have to adapt myself to a new image. So the same, this is kind of a game, okay? So I cannot say that I'm full 100% agree with Karl Popper, for example, and I despise or say his enemies, okay, that are stupid idiots, for example. This is not so. So, but so here is that Wittgenstein was against like proud, um, so ambitious of scientists to solve world problems. And with Karl Popper, there was this idea that scientists must and well, should and can solve, help solving problems. Because according to Karl Popper, the Second World War with its atrocities just was a challenge to scientists, and they um must, according to Popper, use their influence and their intelligence in order to help humanity to get out of its crisis and moral crisis also. Well, Wittgenstein was skeptical, and he said, well, I think it's no use to listen to such type of presentation. And he said, well, give me at least one example of a moral problem. He addressed Popper. And Popper, and at that time, Wittgenstein was holding this poker and sort of putting it into the direction of like menacing with this poker uh, Popper. Well, of course, it was only a joke, but so Popper decided also to say a joke, and because he knew that Englishmen are fond of jokes, so he said that perhaps the moral problem is whether you can menace with the poker to the invited lecturer. And it's Wittgenstein took this joke very seriously. He was sort of enraged, sort of, and so he threw this poker into the heath or into the fireplace and left the room and sort of shut the door with a big noise. Okay, so well, there was a little scandal, and after that, Bertrand Russell took the chair of became a chairman or took the chair of the leader of this conference. So Popper was allowed to proceed with his presentation, but this atmosphere of some unusual situation, some scandal, remained, and that is the essence of this Wittgenstein's poker episode. Okay, so now to end with Wittgenstein and with Pope and with Popper. So we after shortly after this episode in 1947, Wittgenstein just retired from Cambridge University, ceased giving lectures, and sort of did almost nothing. He just visited his friends, privately tutored his favorite disciples or pupils like Elizabeth Anscombe, and visited the United States briefly. But then he felt not well and applied to the doctors, and they diagnosed him with the cancer of the prostate. So his friends, especially Elizabeth Anscombe, who was a devout Catholic, they tried to sort of save the soul of their teacher. So they invited a priest to speak with Wittgenstein. Well, at first they were maybe afraid that Wittgenstein would decline the offer, but Wittgenstein, with his openness to all kinds of language games, he said, well, why not? I can speak with Catholic priest. Why not? So they spoke, they had two meetings with that priest. One was devoted to the idea of God, they discussed God, and another meeting they discussed the soul, the concept of the soul. Perhaps it's immortality, I don't know. Well, the details, of course, are kept secret. There's a so-called seal of confession. Uh, well, that's you cannot disclose what you well, but it was not confession, of course, probably speaking. Well, we don't know, but after that two visits of a priest, Wittgenstein died. So the priest was invited to give him last rites, and then he was buried in the Catholic cemetery, so in Cambridge, and the tomb still remains there on this Catholic plot in the oh, well, this is Catholic cemetery, so on this plot only Catholics could be buried. Okay, so well, this is how Wittgenstein's life ended. So what remained was his legacy, and and here appears the third important figure, uh, Elizabeth Anscombe, of course, and Paul Feyerabend, who worked with Elizabeth Anscombe on editing manuscripts which were left by Wittgenstein. Feyerabend. So after a short break, I will tell you about Paul Feyerabend, who he is, and what role did he play in preserving Wittgenstein's legacy and how it and developing it in a certain way. So I ask you for maybe 5 or 10 minutes, okay? Okay, let's continue because we have not enough time maybe to cover all the, and I promised you not only to speak about Paul Feyerabend, but also about Thomas Kuhn and another school of philosophy of science. So let's start with Paul Feyerabend. Again, he was born in Vienna, now in 1924. I'm sorry, 1924. So he's approximately of the same age as my father. Okay, so it's quite close to us now. So if Popper was of the age of my grandmother, so uh, Paul Feyerabend approaches almost to my age, maybe not to yours, but still 1924 in Austria. So perhaps he was one of those troubled adolescents which needed the treatment of Alfred Adler. And you know that his uh, like genetics was not very well because his mother committed suicide later when he was already conscripted in the army. But this time it was not uh, uh, this time it was not the First World War, but the Second World War. So when it started, um, uh, Feyerabend was only 15, but well, it lasted for 6 years. So later, Paul volunteered to the German army, which was united with Austria. You see, this was a United States kind of, and so, he was sent to an officer school and then to the Russian front. So he struggled, well, he fought somewhere in the region of Staraya Russa or Novgorod. You understand? It's well, we Russians called it a northwestern front. Okay, well, I don't know how the Germans called it. They just called it Eastern Front. What all what was connected with Russia. So well, he fought more or less bravely, we can say, and so during the retreat, he was shot by a Russian sniper in Leipzig and was almost paralyzed. So he had difficulties in walking, and as he later wrote in his reminiscences, Killing Time, that he became an impotent, so he couldn't make um, a sexual act with women. Well, it didn't prevent him from having wives. who loved him, and he was very communicative, and there were many he had many friends also, which helped him to in his academic career. But he always was on painkillers, and barely managed to start walking by his own, well, on his own. So well, he was a deeply ill person, I would say, and also with maybe some nervous complications, but very talented. And when Karl Popper visited Austria, there were conferences in Tyrol, in the city of Alpbach, Austria. So there, Paul Feyerabend met Karl Popper for the first time. Well, at that time, Karl Popper was a celebrity, a star, and Paul Feyerabend was only a student of Vienna University, who even changed. Also, like Wittgenstein, he wanted to be a theatrical like playwright, and even was asked by Bertolt Brecht, a famous playwright, to be his assistant, but declined his invitation. And then he studied physics, and then eventually studied philosophy. So he defended his thesis on a philosophical topic connected with logical positivism in 1951. So at the time when they met in Alpbach with Popper, it was in 1848. So uh, Paul was only 24 years old and was a student, and Popper was a celebrity. But Paul Feyerabend had just this feature to ask difficult questions um, uh, um, uh, while listening to lectures. So once, when he was present at a lecture on philosophy, one of the teacher said, "Paul, either you will keep silent or leave the auditory," sort of, you see, because he was sort of irritated by his, as he considered, impertinent questions. Okay, but well, this was his manner, provocative, which remained throughout the life of Paul Feyerabend. And you remember, not all of you, but some of you perhaps remember the yesterday's talk of Ekaterina Izotova on Paul Feyerabend. Also, not only on him, but on general, she displayed a general picture of the philosophy of science. And she, of course, like, well, many of those who study philosophy of science of the 20th century, sort of underline this like well, unique personality of Paul Feyerabend. Well, and well, what sort of united Paul Feyerabend and Karl Popper? Paul Feyerabend was like a former Nazi. Okay, he fought in the German army, and mm, uh, Karl Popper was a Jew who, well, some of his relatives suffered during the Holocaust, the persecution of the Jews instigated by Hitler. So, but maybe this was all forgotten because they had a common passion for philosophy of science. And so Karl Popper invited Feyerabend to be his assistant in England. And after defending the thesis in 1951, Paul Feyerabend moved to England and studied with Popper for 2 years. I think for 1 year. So I think it was 15. No, 1952 to 1953. He was in England with Popper, like sitting near the, how to say, at the feet of his teacher. Okay, this At that time, he was developed friendship with George Agassi. Well, this person is still living. George Agassi was born in 1927, and he's still living. He's in his 90s, and he lives in Jerusalem, in Israel. He was a Jew, George Agassi. And well, George Agassi, unlike Feyerabend, was a sincere admirer and true disciple, true pupil of Karl Popper. And all his life, he wrote many books, George Agassi. You can just look at him, at his biography in Wikipedia or anywhere else, and you will see that, I'm sorry, I wrote him not correctly. I'm sorry, this is mental problems already start. George Agassi. Well, George Agassi. So if you just look at this, know that George, oh, goodness gracious, as I say, my teacher said, Joseph, excuse me, Joseph Agassi. Joseph, not George. It's something with my brain. So, well, only 1 hour is left, and then you there will be no more of me in your life. So I will only listen to your presentations, but still I have to somehow manage it to the end. So excuse me, this is Joseph Agassi, and he was a pupil of true pupil, true disciple of Karl Popper, and remained as such during all his life. And he always calls Popper the philosopher, not from a capital letter, but just calls him philosopher, not Karl, not Popper, but philosopher. So with Paul Feyerabend, there was another, sorry, another attitude. Paul Feyerabend was always critical to everybody with whom he met. Well, and so when Karl Popper invited him officially to be his assistant, he declined the offer in 1953. But they still remained friends. And well, Joseph Agassi is still living, so he can confirm or deny all the time speaking now. But I'm not sure that he will be looking at YouTube lecture of us. But theoretically, it is possible. Okay, well, so he's the unique remaining eyewitness of all those events. Okay, because all others, including Feyerabend, Popper, and Wittgenstein, have already died. So well, Joseph Agassi remained and became eventually the assistant of Karl Popper, and there was only one post or one place. So at first, Karl Popper invited Feyerabend. When Feyerabend declined, so Joseph Agassi was filled this post, okay, and remained true to Karl Popper throughout his life. And Paul Feyerabend moved to Bristol, where he started teaching philosophy of science in 1955. As he described it, it was just a daring experiment because he didn't know philosophy of science. So when he just wanted to prepare some conspect of his future lectures, he could write only one page. So he showed it to his friends, I don't know to whom, and he said, well, Paul, the first sentence of this one-page summary will be the theme of your first lecture. The second sentence will be the theme of your second lecture, and so on. Well, so Paul Feyerabend started his academic career in very successful. In 1958, he was invited to Berkeley University to California and remained there for, well, quite a long time until 1980s. So, well, he developed a good knowledge of English, and you can see it if you find in YouTube the interview with Paul Feyerabend, which he gave in 1993, a year before his death. He died in 1994. Well, Paul Feyerabend is very well known for his book Against Method, where he against method. So this book was published in 1975. Well, this book is very provocative, and Feyerabend explained why it was provocative. Because he developed friendship with another philosopher of science and assistant of Karl Popper, Imre Lakatos, or Lakatos. Imre Lakatos. Well, yesterday, Ekaterina Izotova also talked about him, his idea of scientific research programs and so on. So he's like a classic of philosophy of science, but for Feyerabend, he was just his friend. Imre Lakatos was born in 1922 in Hungary. He was also Jewish. Lakatos is his pseudonym. His real surname is Lipschitz, but he took this pseudonym just to escape Germans because he was had to remain under disguise. Otherwise, he would be, as a Jew, arrested and sent to the concentration camp. So that's why he changed his surname. Well, and he's now known under this pseudonym, like Voltaire is known as Voltaire. So Lakatos is known as Lakatos and not as Lipschitz. Okay, so Imre Lakatos was only 2 years Paul's senior, and they developed a very close friendship. And well, Imre Lakatos was defending his ideas of in London School of Economics, also together with Popper. He developed his ideas on scientific research programs, and Paul Feyerabend, as usual, was just finding some counter arguments against this idea. And Imre Lakatos liked it very much because it seemed to him very inspiring that there are some discussions. And he asked Paul Feyerabend to write all his objections against his lectures. Well, it started that Paul Feyerabend attended Imre Lakatos' lectures and posed just difficult questions, okay? So Imre Lakatos said, why shouldn't you collect all these questions which you gave to me and just write them down, okay? So it will be a part of our book which we'll publish together, For or Against Method. But then, well, Feyerabend set writing his questions, and at that time he heard that Imre Lakatos died unexpectedly in 1974. So this book was written only by Feyerabend. It was planned to have two authors, Lakatos and Feyerabend, but it appeared only under the name of Feyerabend and contained only criticism of Feyerabend of all the existent theories of philosophy of science, including Karl Popper. Well, also he included in this book Against Method the criticism of another kind of philosophy of science. It is, he criticized the book by American philosopher of science, Thomas Kuhn. And this is a proper time to introduce the new and perhaps the last personality in our discussion. So who was Thomas Kuhn and why he became prominent? You see here we have a closely knitted or closely connected body of Austrian, maybe school, we can say. Starting with Wittgenstein, we could see how it all developed, very closely connected, maybe with some quarrels and unhappy episodes like Wittgenstein's poker, but still they were sort of in one team, okay, fighting with each other, quarreling with each other, arguing with each other, but just this was the, we can say, Wittgenstein Popper school, okay, or Cambridge school somehow, including Bertrand Russell and, well, even Joseph Agassi. So he was as a pupil of Popper, and he's a very important, perhaps not an original thinker. We cannot speak about Joseph Agassi as giving some new model of the development of science, some new topic in philosophy of science, but he's like a true representative of the Popperian school, okay? And also an eyewitness, because many things that we know about Feyerabend or Popper we know by through Joseph Agassi and his reminiscences and also his criticism. He was sometimes critical against his former friend Paul Feyerabend, and when the book Against Method appeared, Joseph Agassi criticized it very strongly, and then Paul Feyerabend retorted, answered to his criticism, and that's how the second book was born, Science in a Free Society, also the book of Feyerabend. But now I will, so in both these books, Science in a Free Society, um, free society, I'm sorry, in a free society, and it was published in 1978. So in both these books, Feyerabend criticizes Thomas Kuhn. So now it is important to know who was Thomas Kuhn, and so he appeared from America, from the United States of America, not from Europe. So this is an American like influence there. And well, Thomas Kuhn, his biography is not very eventful. So well, if it will be eventually published, his biography in the life, in the series Life of Illustrious Man, I just cannot imagine what will be the the intrigue or plot of this book, because life of Thomas Kuhn is quite uneventful, like life of any more or less prosperous professor of philosophy in the United States. Well, first he was born in Cincinnati, Ohio, in 1922, like Lakatos. Then studied in Harvard University. Harvard, I think Harvard University. He studied theoretical physics, okay? And when also there's a certain mystery why he switched to philosophy of science. Well, Thomas Kuhn later explained it that he was puzzled with Aristotelian idea of motion. At first, while maybe studying Aristotle in a course of philosophy, he couldn't just understand what is Aristotelian idea of motion. It seemed so far away from either quantum theory of motion or classical theory of motion. And then he at first appeared this idea of incommensurability of paradigms. So later he coined the term paradigm. Well, what is that paradigm? It's like a accepted uh, picture of the world, scientific picture of the world. And we can speak about also Aristotelian paradigm. And in frames of Aristotelian paradigm, or in frames of Aristotelian research program, there is one definition of motion. And in the frames of, say, Galileo's or uh, Newtonian paradigm, motion is understood quite in another way. So there's a certain incommensurability. You cannot sort of find a principle of like you say correspondence principle between Aristotelian mechanics and Newtonian mechanics. Well, this correspondence principle can be found in when you transfer from classical mechanics to relativistic mechanics. This correspondence happens when the speeds are much lower than the speed of light, okay? Then you can, then the equations of Einstein just like um, uh, I would say softly move into classical equations of Newton. The same happens with quantum mechanics. Is if we deal with actions much higher than the Planck's constant, then we can sort of drop these quantum effects and regard the system as classical. For example, if we deal with the motion of, say, a car or a wagon, okay, or electric train, for example, then quantum effects are negligible. Also, if we launch spacecraft into space, then of course we shouldn't take into account either relativistic effects or quantum effects, okay? Well, but with Aristotelian approach, it doesn't happen. There is no correspondence principle which can unite Aristotelian concept of motion with classical concept of motion, okay? So, well, and we can say that in spite of this correspondence principle, there are the key ideas that underlie quantum mechanics or relativistic mechanics, and the ideas that underlie classical physics are also in certain extents incommensurable. So, for example, the idea of a trajectory as such does not exist, okay? Well, that will be the future of Thomas Kuhn. So he will sort of drop out of theoretical physics and start doing philosophy, history and philosophy of science. But at first, his first book, The Copernican Revolution, was the book mostly on history of science, not on philosophy of science. He's just studied in great detail the events that were connected with the Copernicus discovery, revolution. And here he was influenced by also European school, but quite different from Wittgenstein. He was influenced by the investigations of Pierre Duhem, a famous, well, French physicist and philosopher, representative of second, I think, like that. Well, he was the more or less the the like well he was in the same age group as Ernst Mach and died in the same year, 1916. And he was also mentioned by Lenin when Lenin criticized these empirical critics or second positivists. And the book of Duhem about physical theory, its aim and structure, was even translated into Russian. somewhere when the Book of Lenin appeared, so around 1908. Well, so Pierre Duhem started with the philosophy of science, but then he switched to history of science and wrote his famous 3-volume Etudes sur Leonardo da Vinci. Etude, well, I will give Etude, in French, sur Leonardo da Vinci. Well, that's how he's written in French. Well, the first volume appeared in 1913, I think. Well, just more or less exact about that date. So here he started digging into medieval roots of say Galileo's discoveries. So some of the Galileo's concept, as argued Duhem, were formed already in the 14th century. So he unearthed such figures as Jean Buridan, Albert of Saxony, of whom we spoke in our lectures. Buridan, Albert of Saxony, and Nicolas Oresme. Well, these were all, I think, scientists or scholastics of the 14th century, and they all contributed to important development of important ideas like impetus or relativity of motion. Well, this was a very interesting, and I would say just a very new discovery, because these names were not known either to Hegel or to Auguste Comte or to William Whewell, who wrote the book or History of Inductive Sciences. So 19th century history of science was quite ignorant of these names and of their contribution. So Galileo was regarded as the author of all those concepts which were developed in the 14th century. Later, after the work of Pierre Duhem was continued by 3 important figures. One of them was our sort of compatriot, we can say, Alexander Koyré. Okay. Well, Alexander Koyré, his name was Kaylansky. He also was of Jewish origin, like Popper. He came from Taganrog. But after the October Revolution, he emigrated and settled in Paris. At first, he gave lectures on Russian literature and Russian philosophy, but later he changed his occupation and started doing history and philosophy of science. So in 1943 appeared Alexander Koyré's article, Scientific Revolution of the 17th Century, which was the theme of our lecture, you see, scientific revolution. This, in this way, this term revolution was coined. So it was not Kuhn's idea, because Kuhn later wrote the Copernican revolution in 1957, and then he wrote the structure of scientific revolutions in 1962. This is most important of his book. So scientific revolution of the 17th century. This is the article by Koyré, which is epoch-making also. So this was one. The second was a woman, again a woman, Anneliese Meyer. She was a German, and she lived in Italy most of her time and studied in Vatican Library also. And she wrote a book continuing this idea of Pierre Duhem. She wrote a book which can be in German, of course, but it is translated into English, The Forerunners of Galileo in the 14th century. So this is also a continuation of Pierre Duhem's tradition. And these books, the books of Koyré and the book of Anneliese Meyer, they influenced Kuhn. So, and Kuhn, in his preface to his book, The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, he recognizes the influence of these two figures, Alexandre Koyré and Anneliese Meyer. And just to end the talk about Pierre Duhem's school in America, I should mention Stanley Yaki, who wrote a biography of Pierre Duhem and was acquainted with his daughter, Helene Duhem. Stanley Yaki. He was an interesting personality. He was born in 1923, so he's like of the same age as Thomas Kuhn, and died in 2008. Well, I was privileged to be personally acquainted with this scholar. He wrote an interesting biography of Pierre Duhem, an uneasy genius. Well, what is uneasy? Uneasy means awkward. So he was awkward because he was not fit into the concept of a genius. Well, he was sometimes his behavior was provocative and couldn't be understood by his colleagues. I mean, Duhem. So with this biography, Uneasy Genius, which was published in 1984, Stanley Yaki sort of declared himself like a continuator of this tradition. But, well, nobody noticed him. Only his biography was noticed. But, only Joseph Agassi just wrote a few words about Joseph Agassi. You remember, the pupil of Popper, Agassi. Wrote some words about Stanley Yaki and called him an erudite. Well, why? I can show you the book of Stanley Yaki, The Relevance of Physics. You can see it, yes? And you will see that it's quite big, okay? It comprises, say, 600 pages, well, in the pages like that. So you can see that he's truly an erudite because the bibliography and the index of authors, it takes tens of pages. So yes, he's an erudite. I was personally acquainted with him and even translated 2 of his books into Russian, well, which were published in the 90s when it was possible to publish books that were not in conformity with the Marxist tradition, okay? Well, so now returning to Thomas Kuhn. So Thomas Kuhn in 1962 published his famous book, The Structure of Scientific Revolutions. So it was in the tradition of Pierre Duhem. You see, well, not exactly a structure of scientific revolutions. Well, so there was some, like, Thomas Kuhn used this legacy of the school of Pierre Duhem, so the legacy of Anneliese Meyer and Koyré and Duhem himself, not, of course, Stanley Yaki, because Stanley Yaki appeared at the scene with his first edition of The Relevance of Physics only in, I think it was published only in um, 1966. Сейчас. Revolutions. So this book was published in 1962, and the book The Relevance of Physics of Stanley Yaki was published in 1966. So we cannot say that Kuhn was somehow influenced by Yaki. We cannot find any evidence for that. The Relevance of Physics. But I recommend this book for you also as a like a good and I would say um, trustful source for history of science, physics, and philosophy. Well, this is 1966. Okay, so we'll speak about, of course, the book of Thomas Kuhn because it is much more known. And we'll speak about several important terms or concepts of this book: paradigm, anomaly, scientific community, normal science, and of course, scientific revolution. But I need 5 minutes just to sort of refresh myself, okay? Because you see that my English is failing, okay, because of the stress, I think. So please give me 5 minutes. Well, let's finish this lecture. So we are now with Thomas Kuhn and his important idea of a scientific revolution. Well, it was formulated in polemics with Pierre Duhem, uh, strangely speaking, that um, Thomas Kuhn himself recognizes the influence of the school of Pierre Duhem, but he regards, well, Duhem's approach erroneous, because Pierre Duhem was the representative of the so-called cumulative approach, cumulation or accumulation of knowledge, okay? Uh, Cumulation, cumulation, so cumulative approach. So that's this is can be associated with the approach of Condorcet or Auguste Comte. You remember this metaphor of sunrise, that the sun of knowledge, the sun of human science, sort of appears and conquers the darkness, or the darkness is ignorance or unscientific attitudes or primitive thinking or whatever, you know, pseudoscience and so on. So science is associated with the sun, which rises in the east and moves steadfastly towards the apex or the highest uh, possible high, well, to its highest place or zenith, we can say, in the sky. Okay, so this cumulative approach was sort of questioned by Thomas Kuhn, and he said that science does not develop in such a way. It develops by fits and starts, okay, by sudden changes, which he called revolutions. And also his important thesis is incommensurability. Incommensurability. Uh, incommens incommensurability, like that, of different paradigms. So, and also the concept of paradigm or accepted worldview, accepted theory, like. So, well, if All this, of course, was inspired by his first book, which he wrote on Copernicus. He wrote this title of this book was The Copernican Revolution. So he he understood that there's no commensurability between Copernican heliocentric system and Aristotelian uh, geocentric system, because according to Aristotle, as I remind you, the central position of the Earth was not accidental. It was connected with the Aristotelian view on motion, that motion of so-called sublunar, heavy sublunar elements like Earth and water was sort of was in the direction of the center of the world. And because of that, the center of the earth corresponded with the center of the world. So this is because of the properties of the element of earth, not because, as somebody wrote me in his essay, that God created earth and put it in the middle of the world. No, for Aristotle, there was not such thing as creation. Aristotle considered uh, the world to be eternal. But Aristotle writes that even if we imagine that the earth was somehow generated, then all the particles of this earth would move to the center of the world and just form a sphere, because they would move from all directions. So they will conglomerate into a sphere. And that is the proof of the spherical form of the earth. Okay, this is I closely cite closely to original cite the book of Aristotle on the heavens, the chapter which deals with the form of the earth. Okay, the sphericity of the earth. Well, this is and if we take and if we put the sun in the center of the world, it is contrary to all say axioms or definitions or principles of Aristotelian physics, because according to Aristotle, sun is made out of ether, and ether is the so-called fifth element, which should move naturally around the center of the world. So not because, well, mm, this this is only physics. This is if we regard physical like propositions or physical principles of Aristotle, then it would follow that from them, only from those principles of Aristotelian physics, that the earth should be in the center of the world and that the sun should move around at the center of the world. Okay, so when Copernicus, just for the sake of beauty, introduced this new concept because it seemed to him that his arrangement of the planets and is more beautiful than that proposed by Ptolemy or Aristotle or Eudox. This was in complete disagreement with the cherished principles of Aristotelian physics. Okay, that's why this idea of Copernicus created a revolution. Well, it was also an allusion to the Latin title of Copernicus' books, because in Latin his books bears the title De Revolutionibus Orbium Celestium. But here, of course, we can understand that the word revolution, which is in the oblique case, in the ablative pluralis, the nominative case will be revolutio. This is the Latin word revolutio. which means, of course, just rotation and nothing more. So later, this word revolution was taken to describe the political events like the Glorious Revolution in England. Um, Revolution, or the French Revolution, or the October Revolution. Okay, now the examples can be multiplied. Well, so now we can speak about the Copernican revolution in the sense that it was the first sort of attempt to establish quite a new paradigm. But at first, this science, as Ekaterina Izotova ably described in her presentation yesterday, was imperfect, because of course the Copernican system was not a perfect idea of Newtonian universe. It took the labors of Kepler, of Galileo, of Descartes, and then of Newton, of Barelli also, not to be sort of left in oblivion, the work of Barelli, and then Newton. And with Newton, we have already a so-called developed paradigm or normal science. So we can speak of Newtonian paradigm as a normal science that can be taught in schools and universities. And this is so-called classical mechanics, which is still taught at schools, in the universities. It's not so easy. It is like a how to say, worldview. It is intimately connected with calculus. Okay, so it should be studied very patiently, and it carries with it certain propositions which are innate to it, like, for example, the idea of a trajectory, the idea of a derivative of space by time, okay, the idea of acceleration as a derivative of, say, velocity by time, the idea of momentary velocity. You see, so all this package of ideas were important for this classical mechanics and classical paradigm. Then what happened? We remember the anomaly. This classical idea of Newtonian mechanics combined with Maxwell's equations, also classical feature of classical science of the 19th century, couldn't explain the behavior of electron in the hydrogen atom. So Bohr's postulates were can be compared, according to Thomas Kuhn, with the Copernican revolution. So, but they, like system of Copernicus, was imperfect science, okay, because it contained some unexplained things, and well, even it was could be easily falsified, as I told you. Yes, maybe for navigation, also for the reform of the calendar, which was later performed by Pope Gregory the 12th. Yes, so Gregory the 13th. So this is, well, imperfect. You all understand that Copernican system was not perfect, even from the astronomical point of view. Well, but it later developed into a normal science. The same, the Bohr's postulates. Of course, they were imperfect. They couldn't, for example, explain the atom of helium, because Bohr's postulate did not contain the idea of spin. And well, we should need Pauli principle, the principle of Pauli, to explain more or less correctly the Mendeleev table. Okay, so with principle of Pauli, with the developed idea of what is um, uh, like uh, orbits and their quantum numbers, and this exclusive Pauli principle that two fermions cannot exist with the same quantum numbers and so on. So this, when it was developed, I think we can speak about normal quantum mechanics only well in the 1930s already, and well when and you see, then appears, according to Thomas Kuhn, normal science number two. So the first normal science was the science of Newton, the classical mechanics, and the second normal science was quantum mechanics. In what sense can we speak about incommensurability of quantum mechanics and classical mechanics? Well, because I told you there's a correspondence principle, so we can, when the H Planck's constant is much less than the actions involved in the motion we study, then we can sort of disregard these quantum effects. Of course, when we speak about the motion of electric train, we should not, it is not like the motion of electron in the atom of hydrogen, okay? But the idea is not about the description of the motion of electric train. According to quantum mechanics, well, of course, it is because of the large weight and a large number of atoms involved. The same we can describe the, say, the explosion of the atomic bomb. It will happen necessarily, but the quantum effects that trigger this explosion are in themselves chance, not determinate. So determinacy only comes with large numbers. And the determinacy or classical character of the motion of the electric train comes only because of large mass of this electric train in comparison with the mass of the electron, okay? So now this is only like the descriptions that are only approximate due to some large numbers, okay? But if we take the idea of motion as such, if you remember Zeno paradoxes, which were theme of many essays and which I couldn't unfortunately have covered in my lecture on ancient philosophy. So if we take Zeno's paradoxes, they are about motion as such, not about motion of the electric trains or arrows, or if of course Zeno speaks about the arrow or the turtle or Achilles, but these are only models, these are only signs that we shouldn't take them. We can speak about electron also, the movement of the electron also in the same way as Zeno spoke about the arrow, the motion of the arrow. So if we study motion as such, then we will see that there is incommensurability between quantum idea of motion and classical idea of motion, because the most important thing is the trajectory is no longer valid for quantum mechanics. This is the idea of Thomas Kuhn. Well, now what is, we spoke about anomalies. In what way the anomalies can trigger the scientific revolution? Well, what were the anomalies in Copernican, that triggered Copernican system? These were the anomalies which I described when we spoke about Copernicus, that there's some, we couldn't understand what is the difference between the so-called inner planets like Mercury and Venus and outer planets like Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. Why do they behave in a different way? It remained unexplained. And you know the dictum of Virgil, uh, felix qui potuit rerum cognoscere causas, or from Latin, blessed is that man who can knew the causes of the events, of the things. So we should know the cause. The like that, all the adventure of science is to know the cause of things. And so with the Ptolemaic and Aristotelian view, the cause of the difference in behavior of planets, this difference between inner and outer planets, remained unexplained. And Copernicus suggested an explanation. Okay, so his theory was progressive, and we can regard this difference between the planets as anomaly of Aristotelian science. Okay, well, just more or less approximately. So what about the anomaly of the classical science that couldn't explain the why the atom of hydrogen is stable? The stability of hydrogen atom was not explained by means of classical mechanics, so it needed Bohr's postulates in order to explain what really happened. Okay, so Bohr's postulates explain the spectra of hydrogen atoms and the stability of hydrogen atom. So this was the breakthrough, and then followed the developed quantum mechanics. Okay, so if we believe Thomas Kuhn, that will be the how to say, the law of the development of all our knowledge. So we can seek paradigms also in humanities, in sociological sciences, in psychology, and so on. Well, this theory was embraced by many, but not by all. So it was criticized, as I've mentioned to you, by Paul Feyerabend and also by Imre Lakatos. Imre Lakatos suggested uh, another variant of explanation, the so-called scientific research program, which with its hardcore and protective belt. So we can say that, say, quantum mechanics is a scientific research program. And well, it can develop, its core can also develop. So first it were only Bohr's postulates, then the core grew. It embraced Pauli principle or Schrodinger equation or waves of de Broglie. So it grew, and it could explain more and more facts. So it was like progressive scientific research program. And uh, classical mechanics was degrading research program. So it only could explain limited set of events. For example, the motion of electric trains or cars or satellites, artificial satellites, but it couldn't explain, say, the motion of elementary particles. So, well, but it could they could coexist. Sort of, if you are studying, say, if you are studying the motion of satellites, then you can disregard either relativistic mechanics or quantum mechanics. Okay, so they coexist somehow, and people can be busy with satellites and launching them, and they can forget. If they were taught quantum mechanics, they could easily forget it because they don't need it. Okay. Well, in the same way, according to Lakatos, Freudian ideas, psychoanalysis could coexist with normal psychiatry, for example, which prescribes drugs, well, to the patients, and don't just listen to them, to their dreams. Okay, so these two paradigms, well, these research programs sort of can coexist, and unlike Popper, Lakatos didn't say that Freudian psychoanalysis or Marxism is pseudoscience. He says that falsification principle is not all, that scientific research program by means of its protective belt can resist all these attempts to falsify it. But it is true not only to this is true for all research programs. All research programs have protective belts. All research problem sort of resist to falsification. So resistance to falsification is not the criterion which can demarcate pseudoscience from science, according to Lakatos. Although Lakatos was an assistant, worked together with Popper, so he was not of the same opinion. The same idea was held by Paul Feyerabend, only in more extreme way. Feyerabend not only could sort of, he said that Lakatos was only halfway to truth, that the truth lies that every cultural, say, um, worldview, even the worldview of primitive people, or the worldview of religions, or the worldview of esoterics, or the worldview of, say, um, uh, uh, mm, like occult sciences, or you understand what we sort of even shudder when they are mentioned to us. Paul Feyerabend said that they are also should be included, not as, of course, as scientific research programs, but as worldviews. So every worldview has a right to exist. Okay. Well, this is more or less what I heard from one of the students here. That why I do not include Indian science, or say Chinese science, or say the science of Mexicans, Aztecs, and well, I can say, well, this will be the approach of Paul Feyerabend, that we should be try to find truth everywhere. Well, of course, Feyerabend was criticized by Joseph Agassi. Well, Joseph Agassi, I think, produced a very interesting comparison. Well, for example, you enter the cinema theater and look there is a movie. Well, just you have some, you are waiting for a train or for aircraft, and you are just watching the movie, and the movie seems not interesting to you. And what are your strategies? Just to leave the cinema theater and just try another occupation, visit the cafe, drink tea, or another strategy is to continue watching the film, because according to Feyerabend, perhaps there is something hidden there which will help you triggering your thoughts or something like that. That's this film, in spite of its apparent stupidity, will act as a source of inspiration for you. Okay, it will contain some interesting, maybe allusions or associations that will trigger your imagination and help you to deliver, say, a good lecture on philosophy of science. Okay, so these are two strategies. Well, Agassi says, well, we shouldn't waste time on stupid films, or reading stupid books, or listening to stupid uh, pseudo prophets, okay, and pseudo scientists who always are in great abundance, showing us their so-called um, uh, discoveries. Okay, so this is, I think, more realistic approach which Joseph Agassi sort of suggests us. But Feyerabend also has his logic. It's a logic of a very maybe talented man, but with some, I would say, um, peculiarities of thinking. There we can also pose a question of genius and insanity somehow. But you can form your own opinion on Feyerabend just listening to his interview of 1993 on YouTube. So here you can see how he speaks English with heavy German accent. You can also notice it, and that he is humorous, that he is well disposed, and I think now, even after his death, many of his works and manuscripts are published, are being published still. So he's quite a living, I would say, example of how philosophy of science can be done. Well, Thomas Kuhn also remains a classic. Karl Popper, well, produced a lot of books in English after this fateful event of Wittgenstein's poker, and he wrote the book The Logic of Scientific Discovery, and also gave the idea of these three worlds, which unfortunately I have to omit because of the lack of time, but you can also write essays on this topic also. Well, and well, Stanley Yaki produced also a lot of books with the thesis of the positive impact of Christianity on the emergence of science. And also the second thesis was that universe as a whole was somehow lost in Newtonian paradigm and rediscovered in the general theory of relativity and Big Bang cosmology. So, well, these ideas are also important, and well, I have translated the books of Father Yaki which deal with these concepts, The Savor of Science, which is dealing with positive impact of Christianity on science, and God and the Cosmologists about this loss and regaining of the universe as a concept, as a valid concept. Well, with Popper also, I've told you, well, more or less that's all. Agassi, Joseph Agassi is still living, and he can produce maybe reminiscences or lectures in Jerusalem, or maybe interviews, so you can follow him if he's not retired completely. Who knows? So this is all, more or less, and 12 o'clock. So I wish I say goodbye to you. I mean, goodbye in the sense that I will not speak anything, only maybe just some introduction or say review of the examination sessions. So also I will write to privately examining your essays, so the discussion can be continued there on Canvas. And I want to thank you for your patience with me, with my, well, broken English, more or less. So, and perhaps a heavy Russian accent also. But, well, I am comforted a little bit that such star as Paul Feyerabend also speaks with heavy German accent while speaking English. So, you know, man errs as long as he strives again. And so, well, I think that we should be more humble and more patient with each other. Well, thank you for your attention, and I think we can say goodbye if there are no questions. Maybe if yes, then maybe we'll continue. So, mm, well, I was listening to applause when I was giving the last lecture in Spoltek's auditory, but here's you cannot make applause, and I'm not just a vain man who seeks for applause. I just want to thank you, and I hope this will be profitable for just like continuation of the process of thinking. You see, like Feuerbach says that we don't think as individuals, we think as, when we start thinking, we cease to be individuals, okay? So I'm not an individual, but a representative of a certain tradition. Okay, so goodbye and see you later during the examination sessions, say on Tuesday next week. Okay, 8th of
Thank
December.
you. Bye.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you very much.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Yes,
And thank you.
very much.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.
Okay, thank you for your patience with me.
Thank you, Professor. Goodbye.
Thank you, Professor. That was inspirative. Goodbye.